So, contracts were not. My sister Catherine and I have a rare distinction, and that distinction is that we can tell you all what it's like to grow up Osnos. And, actually, being an Osnos is not as simple as it sounds. For one thing, nobody ever has any idea where you come from. Usually, most of the time, people guess that we're Greeks, except for the Greeks, who they know we're not Greeks. And every once in a while, somebody will say, well, where's your father from? And I'll say, well, he was born in Bombay, which is true, but doesn't really answer the question that they're trying to answer. And then I'll say, well, but his birth certificate from Bombay, and this is true, says caste Polish. And I said this to a Polish cab driver recently in Chicago, and he sniffed and he said, Osnos? Not Polish. So I lived overseas for a long time, and overseas, Osnos didn't really get much attention one way or the other. And then I moved to Washington, D.C. this summer with my wife, Sarah Beth, who is in China right now, but she affirms the following. We got to D.C., and shortly thereafter, we met Steny Hoyer, who's a congressman from Maryland. Never met him before, and I walked up and he said, you look a lot like your father. And I said, he said, 40 years ago I was in the Maryland State Senate, and your father was the Washington Post's man in Prince George's County. And I said, and he said, you've got your father's smile. I said, oh, yeah. And then this sort of started happening. We were house hunting, and we went to go look for a place, and the woman looked at my business card and said, Osnos, you're too young to be Osnos. I said, well, yes and no. And it turned out, this is a true thing, that she had remembered Peter Osnos from National Public Radio back at a time when a newspaper reporter who left the newsroom to go to National Public Radio was considered a heretic and probably should be cast out. But, so that stayed with her. And it sort of kept happening. And then at one point I met a guy who, actually at one point we were at a cocktail party where a woman lit up at the mention of the name Osnos and invited us to dinner. And we were halfway through the soup before she realized that I was a knockoff Osnos. And once, actually, though, that I met somebody named Ruth Marcus, who some people here know, who's at the Post, and she said, Osnos. And she pulled me aside urgently, and she said, I've had a question that I've wanted to answer for 30 years, and maybe you can tell me the answer. Who started the tradition of wearing Turnbull and Asser tailored shirts at the Washington Post? Was it Osnos or Ben Bradley? She said, my theory is that it was Osnos and Bradley was imitating Osnos. I said, that is too good to check. So, but actually, of these various encounters, there was one that really stayed with me more than others, which was I met a guy named Michael Weisskopf, who has been through a lot. He was wounded in Iraq. And he was a reporter for a number of places. But when I met him, and I'd never met him before and never heard about him really from my dad, and he said, when I met him, his wife said, by the way, you should know Michael doesn't like anybody. And I said, okay, that's a great way to meet somebody. And she said, and then he said, I want you to tell your father something from me, which is that he may not remember this, but he was very kind to me when I was starting out in this business. And he didn't have to. He said, I was a nobody and he was a mensch. And I liked that one. And, there's a lot of reasons why I adore my dad. He is, and what I haven't learned from my mother, my beloved mother, Suze, I have learned from my dad. He is a writer, he is an editor, he is a grandfather, he is a mensch. And I have to say, I've never been prouder to be an Osnos than I am today. Oh. Yeah. what we were doing. We'd like to take a photo of everybody together. If we can get people together, we're going to go right around to this side of the house, and we're going to document this.
Can I?
Oh yeah, you're.
I've been working on this for a week. No, actually, it's not true. Take another week. Go back to your novel. On page 34. So what can I say? Pizza. Catherine and Sue's wouldn't tell me what all this was going to be. It's not supposed to be a surprise party, but I didn't really know what the terms of reference were. But Catherine had the notion, and Sue's went along with it, and I figured it was going to be something special. A word that Sue would never use, a special flower that she puts in the house. Today is special. Look at this. I mean, you know, you could do worse. What I was immediately aware of as the cars were being pulled in was that this was a very carefully chosen group of people. It was, to the extent that you can do something like this, it was curated by my wife and my daughter of beloveds from various places. You are not one group. You are many groups from our lives. And some of you don't know each other, and in fact, many of you don't know each other. We have a few cousins here. Susan's grandfather last night was honored at the University of Chicago Hall of Fame for being the last All-American football player.
Here's an oxymoron.
Alonzo Stare. So some of the cousins had to make this choice between the pizza and grandfather Russell, who was a great football player. So some of them were there. But every one of you, and I mean this in as explicit a way as I can, there's a certain belovedness about each and every person here. I could hug each one of you and tell you why, and perhaps we could all stand in the corner of the room. But what makes it such an extraordinary day really is that fact. Each of you represents something in our lives. Some of them have been around forever and ever, some more recent. Keith Nemzov and Harris Berman brought us Sarah Beth, who is joy of, let's face it, father-in-law to have, magnificent daughter-in-law, and to go with my extraordinary son-in-law. But the theme really, to me, truly is how strongly this sense of belovedness from you here today on this occasion. There are too many of our very close friends who would have pretty much given anything to make it acceptable. And several of their beloveds are here represented, and I feel particularly happy to honor. So this is our 8th decade, which means that we've been around a long time. But there's a lot more to come, and I want to just simply say that I would like you all now to repeat those toasts. Starting with Robert.
Because you can't remember.
I've already forgotten. Because I can tell you honestly that authors don't, as a rule, stand up and give you a tribute. They can give you a long list of grievances. But anyway, thank you all very much for coming. It's wonderful to see you, and wonderful to have you here, and wonderful to have this.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.